and CEO of the Pittsburgh Technology Council, joined here with Jonathan Kirsting, who oversees all things media for the Tech Council and marketing. I'm very excited about today's show. This is an old friend and someone who grew up around this part of the world and spent time at the University of Pitt, and I'm very thrilled to have a conversation with him today. But before we get started, I want to just talk about a couple of things. First of all, we have a few great sessions coming up this week, and that includes Catherine Kellerman. She's the CEO of Port Authority. That's tomorrow. And then we have Dr. Alicia Harvey-Smith, president of the Pittsburgh Technical College. And then we have Greg Baer, executive director of the Grable Foundation, and he's the founder of Remake Learning. So I also want to thank Huntington Bank, Sheets, and Comcast. They've been sponsors for a while. They have been with us. We had kicked this off about 20 some odd weeks ago. I think we're in like, what, Jonathan, our 115th show, maybe?
At least, it's big.
At least that, so we're pretty excited. So I want to give thanks to Huntington, thanks to Sheets. They have an innovation center right here in Pittsburgh, and I want to give thanks to Comcast. They have been working diligently on making sure that people have access to Wi-Fi and the tools that they need to help eradicate the digital divide, particularly that's been exacerbated during the pandemic. So I'm going to mute you. You're all on mute. You're on mute intentionally because we don't want to hear anything in your background. But we also have a chat. And, you know, this is an opportunity to ask questions of Marc. He's a pretty smart guy. He's a funny guy, but he's pretty smart. He's done a lot of interesting things in his career. And he actually was on the board of the Tech Council, and he is someone who has deep roots here in southwestern Pennsylvania as well as in Youngstown. So I am going to bring him on and say I'm thrilled. And I guess, should I call you Dr. Malandro?
Yeah.
No, not at all.
Not at all, just Marc, right?
Just Marc is fine, absolutely.
So thank you, Marc, for being with us. Really appreciate it. You have, you know, let's just set the table really quick. You're now with the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, but tell us a little bit about yourself. You have an interesting story.
Sure. Well, like you said, I'm from Youngstown, Ohio, went to Youngstown State University, and then went and got my PhD in molecular biology, and then did a whole bunch of things in industry for a while, started my own company in Davis, California. That's where I am right now, which I went back to. Sold that company to Novartis, and then went to Pitt for about 14 years. Did everything up to starting the Innovation Institute with a lot of help from a lot of good people. And then in August of 2017, got a call about building something out in California, and it would be a new type of philanthropy that would be funding basic biomedical research, about $300 million worth a year for at least 10 years. And it's sort of the opportunity that you can't pass up. And so since August of 17, almost exactly 3 years, I've been out here in California. The offices, when we can go into them, are in Redwood City. I live in Davis, about 100 miles away, which tells you a little bit about my commute. No, it's been a really interesting ride so far. When we first started, there were 3 initiatives: education, which is focused on technology-based learning; justice and opportunity, which is dealing with criminal justice reform, income reform, and that's where all of the local Bay Area work that the group does is as well. And then science, with this whole notion of funding basic biomedical research to accelerate science, but really living in this world of between biology and computing. A lot of the issues that science is having now is really a data problem. And a lot of the tools are from pure tech, and in fact, at CZI, about half the employees are on the tech side: software engineers, data scientists, UX, UR researchers, product people, and realize that you can take that sort of Silicon Valley software engineering mindset and apply it to problems in biology, and you can make a lot of progress in a very short period of time. And so we've been up and running on our 5-year strategic plan I wrote in 2017 for implementation in 2018. And now what we're doing is just really putting together a metrics and assessment and evaluation effort trying to see if the initial bets we made are starting to pay off. But it's been a real interesting and fun ride so far. I would have never imagined I was here. You know, when you talk to people, I'm sure you're asked the same thing. How did you prepare for what you're doing? And there's no preparing for any of this. It was just, no, never. It's just being willing to take chances and willing to look at what's interesting and giving it a try. Like you, did you ever suspect you'd be at the Tech Council?
Nope.
And so when you get that, it's like, how do you prepare for this? It's like,
Right.
I don't know. You take a chance sometimes.
Well, I mean, I think, so your background, do you come from a background of family that went to college and?
I'm first generation college. So my family mainly worked in the steel and titanium mills. My grandfather, actually his family came from Italy and moved to Newcastle, specifically to work in the steel mills from Italy. And so I was the first one. In fact, I actually, during my summers, worked in the mill to pay for school. And so, it was.
What was your job?
It was anything that they would have me do that no one else wanted to do. And they called it laborer, which means all the worst jobs, it's the ones you got to do. Yeah. But it was a fantastic opportunity, and you met great people and made some money. But what it gives you that certain work ethic that I think that is unique to Pittsburgh and Youngstown and those areas, that is just, you do what you have to do. You don't complain about it, and you get up the next morning. I was the first one to do this.
So
and
here
I
you
never.
Are at the Chan.
Go ahead, Bob.
You're at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. What's the mission? Talk about the big mission, and then how the science piece, because there's been a lot of initiatives, and I'd like you to do a little bit of a deep dive in that.
So the simple mission statement for the entire organization is a future for everyone, with the fundamental belief that luck should not determine where you are or what happens to you in life. The science initiative itself, its mission is to cure, prevent, or manage all diseases by the end of the century. And the good part about that is we don't have to do it. All we have to do is fund good scientists, fund good science, help build culture, help accelerate science, and other people actually, the people we fund, the people we partner with, the people we develop tools for, are the ones who do the important work. Aside from some computational biology at CZI, we don't do a lot of science ourselves. One of the places that we do is we have a freestanding research facility outside the Mission Bay campus in UCSF called the Chan Zuckerberg Biohub. The Biohub itself does research, has about 100 people working there, working on imaging, working on data science. That group also supports faculty members at UCSF, at Berkeley, and at Stanford, working on collaborative, high-risk, high-reward projects in those same areas. What was interesting about the Biohub was one of the co-presidents, his name is Joe DeRisi. He's an infectious disease specialist. It just so happened that Joe DeRisi was the person who identified SARS in 2003, which is now called SARS-CoV-1. And so we were in a unique position to really pivot Biohub and pivot some of our work to address the immediate emerging crisis that's happened with COVID. Everything from setting up a CLIA certified testing laboratory in 7 days, all the way through to research work that's being done now to look at spread by looking at the viral RNA and seeing how small changes spread amongst communities. So we're in a real interesting place to do a lot of that. But it's still with the same philosophy, sitting at the interface of biology and computing and trying to accelerate science.
And so you invest in these initiatives. Are they through grants, through venture? How could people, how do people get involved? I've seen you do a couple of calls for, grant submissions over the years. Can you sort of just talk about that process? Because it's not just for people in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, so CZI is set up as an LLC. We have foundations, including donor advised funds, as well as the CZI Foundation, where we make our grant funding from. But we are an LLC to preserve flexibility, and we do have a venture on. But most of the work in science are competitive requests for applications. So what we'll do is we'll spend some time scoping, we'll talk to our scientific advisory board, we'll host workshops, trying to understand those new areas that we should go into. This is what we did in imaging, which is our newest program. What we're trying to create in imaging is essentially a Google Earth of the human body, where you zoom out and then you can zoom all the way into the individual protein level. There's a lot of technology that has to be developed there. The first is deep tissue imaging. How do you look through skin? How do you look through deep tissues in a non-invasive way? In a way that you can do this in real time while the body is functioning, not necessarily pictures. So a lot of imaging right now is going from this snapshot in time pictures to videos. And that's where this data problem is coming in as well. And it's just a large data problem at this point. That's our new one. So we put out a competitive RFA for technology development. But what's good is, let's say that we've developed technology that the only way it's going to get disseminated is not in a scientific paper. It's going to be in something that someone can buy. We have the ability to either seed or start companies, or to invest in companies who will commercialize that and then make it widely distributable. So it's all program focused types of investment, but really it's to disseminate and get stuff out there as broadly as possible. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was going to ask, keep going. I was going to ask for just an example of some of the companies that you've invested in, but keep going.
And what I was going to say is, yeah, the whole notion is to ensure that these tools are out there and that people can use them as broadly as possible. One of our programs is called EOSS, Essential Open Source Software for Science. These are software tools that are already out there that hundreds of thousands of scientists are using. We put out a call that says, look, we understand no one's maintaining these, or they were written by a postdoc or a graduate student, and there's no documentation, or they run on premise and they're not running on the cloud. We are funding something that's really simply maintaining these types of tools. We've had 3 separate rounds. We're in the 3rd round right now. And it's really to make sure things are available. So what we try to do when we fund is we also fund in areas that other people themselves aren't funding, the NIH or otherwise. With respect to science investments, as you were asking, we haven't invested in any companies yet. Most of that has been done on the education side. It's still a tool that we can use, but since we started so early in basic science, and we've only been around for 3 years, doing this work, nothing has gotten to the point where we might say, hey, it's time to think about how to distribute this more broadly.
Okay, that's great. So there's 2 questions out there, Jonathan. I think I answered Ellie's, but what about Ray?
Ray says, says, hi, Mark. He says, thank you for your presentation today. What did you use or leverage from your past experience in this great opportunity at ZCI?
Well, you know, everything I've always done has focused sort of at the interface between science and something. So science and business, science and law, and trying to make science accessible and useful to the general public. It may not be a manuscript that's most useful. It may be a thing. It may be a company. It may be a product. And so I've always really relied on my deep, you know, sort of, not expertise, but my learnings in science. You know, I was trained as a scientist. I got my PhD in sciences, realized that the bench was probably not the place for me, but everything I do is rooted in the understanding of science. So even though I'm doing operations, essentially, and keeping the wheels on the bus and running what is in science, a 130-person show, it's really based on what is best for the science, what works for the science. I would say, you know, there's a lot of things I learned at Pitt before coming here. I learned patience. But I also, you know, it's the ability to quickly look at all of the good work that's being done and realize that scientists are good when they do their science, and they need to surround themselves with people who can support them. The head of science, her name is Corey Bardman. She is a faculty member at Rockefeller University, a member of the National Academies, and she's a great scientist. And I learned at Pitt that you can do things that scientists either don't necessarily do, don't want to do, or you have a little bit more expertise in, and you can really lift them up. And that's what I try to do at CZI is everywhere from Corey to the other science program officers, really clear roadblocks, get them the resources, try to lift them up, and develop a network of people who can do the same. Allow them to do the great work that they can do. And that's what we do in building community. Not only do we fund people, we also develop community amongst them. It's networking amongst them. It's understanding where the gaps are in their communities. It's connecting different communities. So right now in neuroscience, they're not as connected to the computational community as they could be. And there's a lot of things and questions that they want to ask that they don't necessarily have the tools right now to ask. So we've connected those two communities. Mm-hmm. So it's understanding and knowing that all this is people. At Pitt, it was the same way. It's a people game. And it's working well with people and helping people, and it's the same way here.
Yeah. And so you have a question. There's a question there from Christine. What are you addressing in, what problems in education have you been addressing? What are your priorities in education? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with the education side, but I can tell you most of the work that they're doing is on technology-based learning and distance learning, and this was even before COVID. They have a technology-based platform called the Summit Learning Platform that they've been working on. It's doing this as well as funding research in whole child education. And so a lot of their work has, in COVID times, is pivoted to making these platforms as well as other platforms more available. So in the Bay Area, for instance, that group has actually funded Chromebooks for a number of low-income districts who couldn't necessarily afford those. As a way of trying to, sort of level the playing field. If you go to certain private schools, it's pretty easy to do distance learning because you have a fast internet connection and have the technology. If you're in the East Palo Alto or Bellhaven neighborhoods, you might not have access to that. And so CZI is trying to pick up some of that.
So when you moved out there, and even now when you say this is where you're from, Pittsburgh, and Youngstown, we were at the University of Pitt. What's the reaction out west? What are they, what are things that you think we should know about what people think about Pittsburgh?
Because of the work of you and a lot of people, I do really think that they see it as a tech hub. That may be sort of biased because, Facebook is there, Oculus is there, Google's there. But in the places we run, I think it has a respect that I can tell you wasn't here when I was here 15 years ago, when I had my company here. I think that they also see it as both investment potential, but also talent potential. And I can tell you that in these times, when people are thinking a little bit more about what work looks like going forward and understanding that all of us being back in a big open office plan every day of the week is likely not going to happen. The ability to look at great sources of talent and great pools of talent around the country and around the world are going to be more important. And in those conversations, Pittsburgh always comes up. And it's because of Pitt, it's because of Carnegie Mellon, it's because of the community, and because of the willingness of the community to partner and lift those types of work up. And so I think at least the places that we've run, the respect right now is a lot better than it used to be. And I think it's going to get even better in the future as remote work is a possibility.
So do you sense that there really are people out in the Valley that are looking to live other places now that we're in 6 months into COVID and this hybrid of working and working from home? Do you have any sense of that?
100%. I can tell you the people in our place, the people that we talk to, you have Google and Facebook and a few others letting people work remotely until the beginning of July. You have a lot of younger people who don't have sort of the stuff that they've accumulated over their lifetimes like more established people have. And so they're sitting there going, am I going to sit in San Francisco in an 800 square foot studio apartment for $3,500 a month? Or can I live wherever I want to live? And I think, so I do think you see a lot of people choosing. So if it's just some cases, it's moving out of the city, moving into even areas like us in Davis. Everyone thought that these areas were going to have issues with respect to the economy, but it's a lot of people from the city coming out here. But now that's even becoming more pronounced, is people deciding that I'm going to live where I want to live, not where I have to live for work. But I think you're going to see it as those who can jump on it quickest is a great recruiting tool. If I'm ready to be remote, let's say I do satellite offices. Let's say I do something like that, where now I look where is the best talent? Where can I have access to that talent? And how do I get it before anyone else does, rather than saying, hey, you got to move. So we've onboarded probably almost 100 people since the beginning of March, when we first started this. And so they were successfully onboarded, they were successfully up and running and successfully working. You know, who knows where they're at? And so I think you're going to have a lot of people who, because of culture, because of work environment, because of the work we do, that we all have to be in the office together. But I guarantee you're going to see more hybrids in the future than not. So and those who do the hybrids are going to be the ones to get the best talent.
So what's your advice then in terms of the recruitment? You started to talk about that a little bit. Those who essentially win will have what? An aggressive recruitment strategy, or what?
They'll have an aggressive recruitment strategy from a few select locations that they see as being great sources of talent. Right. I think you're going to see this whole notion of satellite offices, because I think people do need, every once in a while, need some community or a home week or something like that. So I think, you know, where those satellite offices are is going to depend upon talent, not necessarily the cost of living anymore. And I see it happening. And those who do it first are going to be the ones who win, whether it's philanthropy or any other type of company that you don't have to physically be there, like laboratories.
And so when are you planning on bringing the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative to Pittsburgh? Or do we need
I don't know. That's a good question.
About this?
That's a good question. I'm constantly referred to as the other Mark at CZI, and so the Mark has to make those decisions.
So Anita has a question on thoughts. How can we bridge the technological divide to level the playing field between the have and have-nots? And I think that's something that's always been near and dear to you in the time that I've known you. Because one of the things also that Mark didn't say about himself, he also has facilitated the role of science and the economy. He also had that piece when he was here in Pittsburgh. What does it mean to grow these companies and have that kind of economic development? So any thoughts on that?
Well, on the have and have-nots, I'll give a specific example. So we, along with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, have started a project several years ago called IDSeek. And what IDSeek was meant to do is, by looking at a patient's blood and by doing DNA and RNA sequencing out of a patient's blood, if you remove the patient, all that's left are things that may be infecting that patient. So you can do an unbiased survey of what an infection looks like, both viral and bacterial. So we've deployed this all over the 10 sites all over the world, one of them Cambodia. What we did was took the heavy lifting in terms of the compute necessary to do this. And so I think cloud-based computing has started to level the playing field. I don't need a bunch of servers to run the comparative analysis that would have otherwise taken hours. I can now put it in the cloud on IDSeek, and I can do the comparison while keeping everything else in country. So not some imperialistic enforcement on people, but it's really how can I provide you with the tools to do this yourself? And the IDSeek outpost in Cambodia was the first one to detect their first COVID infection, developing those types of cloud-based platforms. The other thing is in developing tools. We believe that in developing tools for analyses, that you're now allowing people, regardless of where they are, regardless of where they work, regardless of the countries in which they work from or the states, you're giving them access to the same types of tools that other people would have. A particular analytical tool to look at gene expression in cells. It's the same tool that they'd have access to at MIT versus access to anywhere else in the world. And so if we develop tools, analytical and imaging tools to work on those cloud-based platforms, we truly believe that is a way of dealing with some of those. There's a whole lot of thoughts about how far back one has to go into things like education and access, but a lot of the have-nots are rooted in systemic racism. And so I think we have a lot of work to do, as a society to figure those types of things out, trying to get level playing fields from the very first times that kids are younger, and really supporting them as they go through this. One of the things we do is there's a program that comes out of University of Maryland, Baltimore County. It's called the Meyerhoff program. UMBC is not a historically Black college, but they graduate more African Americans who go on and get their MD PhDs than anyone in the country.
Oh, wow.
They do that because of this Meyerhoff program, which has an educational component, but mentorship, and really developing a community. And we've funded replication of that at UC Berkeley and UC San Diego to see if those learnings are transferable. So trying to get in the educational platform, because it's going to take diverse approaches to answer really tough problems. And so we need people looking at these things in a fundamentally different way. And Meyerhoff is potentially one way we can increase that pipeline.
So we're coming sort of to the end, but I want to ask you, what project have you worked on where you think it's been the most fun over these last 3 years? I mean, is there anything that you can, that you might want to share?
So I would say that our support for the Human Cell Atlas work has been fun. It's a collection of scientists around the world trying to understand and map and identify all of the cells in a human body. So there's been thousands of researchers around the world. We're helping develop the data platform to allow them to share and analyze their information. But to see that project everywhere, from doing grants about how you get these cells out of tissues, to grants to developing analytical tools, to seeing people develop automation platforms to make this work, to actually seeing something out right now called the COVID-19 Cell Atlas, where they've taken and applied these same techniques that they were using for this reference data set and applying it to COVID patients, and starting to understand, why do some people have infections in their lungs versus why do some people have infections in their bloodstreams, in the endothelial cells. And so I think that that was really an interesting proof of concept that wouldn't have otherwise, I don't think, got done at the scale that it got done, because a lot of it is funding development of controls, which aren't going to make really high impact publications, but really serve as the foundation for the analyses later on. And then I will say, this imaging work is really interesting because it actually takes learnings from other places. If you think about autonomous driving vehicles, they have to determine the difference between a stop sign and a parking cone and a person. It's the same for labeling cells. And so in imaging, you actually take all of this work done in astrophysics and autonomous driving vehicles and apply it to biology, which to me is really fun and exciting as well.
Well, I'm proud of you. We miss you here. We're proud of you. And if people want to follow Marc on LinkedIn, he always puts information out about what's happening over at CZI. Marc, any final words that you'd like to share with us? Anything that you want to tell us, as we're your fans from afar and proud of how far you've come?
No, I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks again. And I just, always have a fondness for Pittsburgh. It really, set the stage for everything I've done since. And I'll tell you that one of the things that I personally like most is the fact that everyone cares about how everyone else does. You don't see that out here. You don't see the level of just support, or the fact that you can get to someone within a few phone calls. And that's really unique in Pittsburgh. And And thank you for helping create that environment as well.
No, thank you. So that is Marc Malandro with the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. Follow him on LinkedIn. You can reach out to him there. He is a legend in terms of the work that he's done at the University of Pitt. We heard from Evan Focher, was it maybe 2 weeks ago, who talked about, and blamed Mark, but talked about all the work that's going on in the innovation work over at the University of Pitt. So thank you so much, Mark. We will stay in touch with you. Stay safe. And we look forward to what the next chapter is.